Biden, and Walter Isaacson, President and CEO of the Aspen Institute.
Thank you so much for being here.
I miss Tom Friedman.
Your wife was, there's Tom right there, John Doerr, Tom.
Tom, you have a wonderful daughter.
Yeah. And Tom,
my dad used to have an expression. He'd say, you know your success as a father, you look at your kid and you realize they turned out better than you. She's better than you, kid. She's better than you. I'm a success as well.
And if Orly's wondering where her knapsack is, it's in my office because they wouldn't let her bring it in because she had juices in it. Well, thank you for being here. The Vice President, everybody knows much about him, but what you most know about him is he actually cares about every person in America, gets up, has that instinct that every working and middle-class person needs to be part of our prosperity. I've heard him talk about this since 1973 or so when you entered the Senate. And so once again, let's give him a warm Aspen welcome. If we could, I'd like to start with what the President most recently tasked you to do, which is this moonshot on cancer. It wasn't something you knew a lot about, except for from a deeply personal perspective. Tell me what you've learned, what we're doing, how we're fighting cancer now.
I'd like to ask one question before I begin. Newt, are you going to do it?
Nude,
all right, that's okay. That's all I wanted to know. I just want to get to the important things on the bat.
And
I think he needs the help, yes.
The question was, should I?
Should he be vice president? I tell him. Anyway, it's a hell of a job. Get a big pay raise, it's all work. Anyway, I'm sorry. You asked a serious question.
No, actually, right before, because that's not bad. Should he, not just Speaker Gingrich, but should somebody be? I mean, is there something you've really shown what you could do as vice president?
I don't know about
Tell
that.
me about that job. And
Well,
tell
you
Newt
know,
about the job.
As Newt's buddy sitting to his left's an old friend of mine, too. The damn Republican, but I love him.
And Korologos, our former chair.
But all kidding aside, when I was asked to consider this by then Senator Obama, when he was the presumptive nominee, I actually thought I could help him better by not doing it, by staying in the Senate. And he said he needed an answer right away, and I told him, no, I don't want to be considered. And he said, how much time do you need? So I went home and talked with my family. He asked me to go home and talk. And then Jill was right that I should do it. It's been the most rewarding thing I've done, only for one reason. There is no inherent power in being vice president. None, zero. It totally, completely, thoroughly depends on your relationship with the President of the United States, whomever that vice president is. And the great benefit for me is that in the 13 debates we had seeking the nomination, he and I are the only two that never disagreed in principle on any specific, on any issue, tactic we disagreed. He's been an absolute man of his word. He asked what I wanted, if there was any one request to do it. I said, I just want to be the last guy in the room. I mean, not figuratively, literally, the last person in the room. He's president, he makes the decision, but after all the years I spent in the Senate, I wanted an opportunity to try to affect the outcome of some of these vital decisions. And he's been absolutely, thoroughly consistent. And the interesting part is he said it a different way, as only the president could say. He said, to my surprise, we became great friends. I said, but he has become a very close personal friend. And what's made it all work is our families are close. My number 3 granddaughter and his number 2 daughter, each other's best friend. They vacation together. They're in the same school together. They're the same teams together. Jill and Michelle are good friends. So it's worked out really well because he's been inclusive. But there's no, and the other thing I've found, and I think Newt would agree with this because he's studied it, the job of president is so complicated these days that there's no one woman or one man that can do it without being willing to trust someone else to give them major responsibility. And so therefore you have to have a genuine relationship. You have to be on the same page. And so when we did the Recovery Act, which I know a lot of folks didn't like, I think was a great success, the president just said, do it. I never once checked with him. I never went back. He gave me control over the cabinet. The same with other things we've done. So it's not because anything special about me. It's just the job is so big. And it's gotten so broad, and the world has changed so drastically. You really need someone who is value-added. So I wasn't kidding. Newt and I disagree, but he's one of the brightest guys I know. He knows the government, he knows the issues, and I would feel better, even though we disagree philosophically. No, I'm not being facetious. I'd feel better knowing that there was somebody there with the depth and gravitas on the issues that Newt possesses. There are others who possess it as well. So that's a long way of saying that the relationship, the personal relationship, really, really, really matters. Trust matters. And what I've been able to do because of his trust, when I've traveled 1,200,000 miles around the world. Tom and I have talked about this. When I show up with another head of state and I say something, they know I speak for the president. There's no one wonders. No one wonders. Some of my colleagues in the Senate wonders if I say something in the House or Senate. And it's not because of me. It's because he said, I have this relationship with Biden. Biden speaks for me. And if you do it well, and I hope I've done it somewhat well, it can be value added for the president.
Great. Well,
I never looked for this job, though.
I know, but
I
we
never
will,
ran for vice president.
We will know in 2 weeks whether your endorsement today of Newt Gingrich as vice president will help his chances or destroy his chances to be the vice presidential running mate.
I want to make it clear. I want to make it clear. Donald, I am not endorsing. I'm just saying he's bright as hell. I disagree with him, though.
Let's go back, if we can, to the moonshot. Explain what the moonshot is.
Well, look, the moonshot, one of the things that I sometimes almost regret we called it the moonshot because, Kennedy and Nixon talked about a moonshot, and people expect that there's some kind of epiphany that's going to occur, and there's going to be a breakthrough on all cancers. We're going to cure cancer. That was never what this was about. The way this came about is I said when I announced I wasn't running, and Newt, I found out you want to be popular, announce you're not running for president. I would, if I'd known this, I would have announced every day I'm not running. But I said, and it was more wistful, Walter, than anything else, I said in the Rose Garden, but I would have liked to have been the president who presided over a fundamental change in cancer. And the reason I say that is we've reached an inflection point, and some of the real experts that are in this audience know it. We've reached an inflection point that didn't exist during Nixon's time. For the first time, I learned when our son, Jill and I, when our son was going through what he went through, that up to 5 years ago, immunology was like it was out in the wilderness. No one paid any attention. There was very little collaboration and cooperation between virologists and immunologists and genomic science. I mean, there was none of that. There was no collaboration. But now there is. It's only just beginning. It's beginning. There's a lot more to do, but the difference between when Nixon announced it now, we've mapped the human genome. We're in a position where immunology is making significant strides. We have cooperation with all. We have everyone from mechanical engineers to biochemists to that are engaged in the enterprise. And it's, for example, when Nixon announced it, we had no idea there were 200 different cancers.
Nixon announced a war on cancer.
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon.
Ago.
I beg your pardon. And so what we've decided, the president and I, is that he decided was that I believe we could make 5 years of progress what otherwise would take 10 years. Even if we didn't have another single major breakthrough. If we take all the information we have available to us now, better organize it, correlate it, share it, change the way the federal government operates, its various agencies, the way everything from the FDA to the NIH, the way the drug companies move, the way in which we do dual trials, the way we share information. For example, now we can do, I know you know this because you've written about it, we can do a million billion calculations per second. And so the ability to find patterns of why cancers form, why a cancer cell develops, how it metastasizes, give me an example. There was a study done, I think it was with 1,400 women on Medicare on ovarian cancer. And they used one therapy on all of them, and only a handful benefited from the therapy. And they're trying to figure out why that was the case. But because there were only 1,400, they went back and they aggregated all the health records, the backgrounds of these women, what other medicines they were taking, what their lifestyles were, et cetera. And to oversimplify it, what they found out was those women who were taking a statin while they were taking this anti-ovarian cancer drug, they did the best. They did the best. Now imagine with our ability to sequence the cancer genome. Imagine if we're able to aggregate the biopsies that have been done on cancer. Imagine if we can aggregate the lifestyles, the treatment process, et cetera, all in one place. We had 2 million, 5 million, 10 million folks in that one spot. The ability of these supercomputers to go in and find patterns, to find out what it is in terms of everything from lifestyle to what other drugs you're taking, to find answers as to why so many people, all of you know somebody who has suffered from cancer. All of you know somebody, and maybe some of you, who are dealing with fighting cancer. And you know people with the same exact diagnosis taking the same drug, 2 different outcomes. Imagine if we were willing to share this data. Imagine what we could do. And so there's a lot of breakthroughs that are possible, but we have to change sort of the culture a little bit.
Let me push on that a bit, because for that to work, you have to be able to be counted into a big database. HIPAA makes it very hard to share electronic medical records. It's difficult for me even to get my electronic medical records, from Washington out here. Why haven't we been able to break the back, as Eric Lander said earlier this week, as Sylvia Burwell said earlier this week, break the back on big data and getting our data in if we want it?
Come hell or high water, I'm going to break the back.
Yes.
No, not a joke. Because
it's important.
Because what's happening here is, look, I'll try to be delicate.
Don't.
The culture of medical research does not rest on sharing data and information, number one. And it's not, by the way, they're all good guys and good women. It's just the way in which it's developed over the last 100 years, number one. Number two, you have, when I keynoted the Davos this year and I was asked, though, before I would do that, would I have a roundtable on cancer? And I had two Nobel laureates at that round table. I had a number of folks of heads of major hospitals, and they started talking to me about how there's Orion, there is CancerLink, there are a number of these new organizational structures where you have philanthropy and major hospitals
why don't I give you this? Yeah.
That have major hospitals And what they're doing is they're correlating data, all the data they have in one place. And so I asked them all to come visit me, and I won't mention them all, but 5 where close to $1 billion is being spent to aggregate this data. And I said, tell me what you're doing. And I sat in the ceremonial office of the Eisenhower building at that big conference table. And they all told me what they're doing. And I said, well, it sounds like you're all doing the same thing. I'm not being facetious. And they all kind of put their heads down. And I said, wouldn't we make a hell of a lot more progress if it was all open data, if you shared it all? And the answer was, yeah. And after we broke up, and 2 of the heads of these major outfits came up to me and said, keep the pressure on. I can't do this myself. I mean, I'm not able to, you know. So there is a growing recognition on the part of the major, I've visited now 10 or 11 of the major cancer centers in America, in the world, but they're in America. I've spent a better part of a day at each one of them. I have I've spoken to over 9,000 cancer researchers. These 2 large organizations represent them. I've privately met with over 280 of the leading virologists, oncologists, immunologists in the world. And they all privately say basically the same thing. They say that we're not sharing data well enough, and if we did, we could exponentially increase the potential to find answers to a whole range of questions relating to cancer therapies. Number 2, they say that it is very difficult to be able to do dual trials with different medicines. You represent one drug company, I represent another. A bright young researcher says, I think the combination of those 2 could really have a potential impact, and it does. They say that there's no way, if any of you have gone through it, where if you want to find out whether you can get in a cancer trial, there's no place you can go to find out every cancer trial that's going on in the United States. Hell, I can get on, you can get on, Uber can tell you exactly where everybody is, how to, I mean.
Well, let's pick that one. How do we get more people access to information about getting into cancer trials?
Well, here's what we're doing. We are changing. We're going to have at NIH, we're having a new website. I knew you'd ask me that, so I can't remember what the hell the name of the website is, but
Greg, what's the website?
But we'll, as I say, get it to you. But there's going to be a new website where we are going to aggregate every single solitary trial that takes place in the United States of America. Because here's what happens. If you don't live near a major cancer center, you don't live near MD Anderson, or you don't live near the Hutch, I can name them all, and you're an oncologist in a rural area in the Midwest or anywhere in the country, you have a patient you diagnose with a particular cancer, and you want to get them in a trial, you have no idea how the hell to get them associated with or tied up with or connected with that trial. So there's going to be one place, we're in the process of putting this site together now, and that NIH is, where you can click on and you can find out what every trial for every type of cancer that's being conducted. It's also a helpful thing for the pharmaceutical companies. They have trouble finding people to be in their trials. And the perception is that people don't want to give their information. Well, they're much more ready and willing to give their information, and it can be done, and your privacy protected very easily. But up to now, there's been no willingness to decide there's going to be one site, one place. And
in return, should the pharmaceutical companies try to keep a lid on these $100,000 a year drugs?
Well, that's not necessarily related, but yes, they should try to keep a lid. But look, in fairness to the companies, they drill a lot of dry holes. They spend a lot of money doing a lot of tests that cost tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. They get no return on their investment. But there's some place between the sweet spot between a legitimate return on your investment and holding hostage people who need the drug to live but can't possibly afford the drug. For example, there is one particular drug that's been very, very helpful. I don't want to pick on a particular company. One particular drug has been very helpful for a lymphoma cancer, a particular one. When the drug came out 15 years ago, and it's pretty miraculous the impact it has for this particular cancer, it was $26,000 a year. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know where Greg Simon is, but I think it's $149,000 a year. Let me ask you a rhetorical question. Imagine if Jonas Salk decided that he was going to patent, like drug companies do, essentially get a patent for his vaccine for polio. And he said, okay, I'm going to charge $1,000 a shot. What the hell would have happened? What would have happened? There's some place between a rational return on an investment and profit, particularly since an awful lot of what drug companies are able to accomplish are a consequence of taxpayer investment in research and development. There's about somewhere between 80 and $100 billion a year in research done by a myriad of outfits out there to try to find cures or drugs that will increase the lifespan. About $30 billion of that's federal money. Mm-hmm. And so there is some correlation here between their progress, their success, and their societal obligation. And I think this can be done. Excuse my back to people over here, I apologize. And my Secret Service agent is 8 feet tall, so I can't see you here. By the way, he's a great guy. I'm embarrassing the hell out of him right now, but he was a hell of a basketball player. That's another question. Anyway. I don't get a chance to embarrass them very often. Yeah. But to make a long story not quite so long, there has to be. I met with industry a round table at the Cancer Moonshot summit we had, and a number of industry personnel. We had a round table. It was off the record with about 20 people, and I said, look, we have to have an adult conversation about this. There's got to be a way. We've got to find a way through here. You know, as Lasker said, if you think drugs are expensive, try disease. I'm paraphrasing. And so there is a correlation between the communal obligation, the public obligation to underwrite the cost of some of these drugs that exceed the cost that is imposed, that is incurred by drug companies in producing these drugs. But it's a debate that has to take place because you're going to see in the next 6 months to the next 5 years, you're going to see some significant drug applications that can extend and save lives, that the price tag on them is absolutely prohibitive, including copays. Last point, and this is not a political point, it's a practical point. Without the Affordable Care Act, or something replacing it, you would have tens of millions of people who could not even remotely afford some of the expensive but much less expensive drug requirements that cost $10,000, $20,000, and $30,000 a year. So if you're a family of four making less than 60 grand, you still have great trouble, but you don't ever have to pay more than 12. That's a gigantic chunk of your income. But still, it's within the reach of some people to be able to do. But without that, I mean, we're going to find you have a revolution on our hands, figuratively speaking.
Mm-hmm. What about if you have your? Yeah, you can keep that. I think mine's working. Trust me. What if you had your gene sequence? You're on one of these drug trials. How do we make it easier to say, "Count me in"? Put all of my data out there in the public realm for people to use?
Well, there's two things. One, you got to make clear to people they own their data.
Yeah.
And right now, it's not so clear they do. Right now, there is, I remember, Jill won't like me mention this because it's, I remember with Bo, my son, the Attorney General, I assumed that the sequence of his human genome he owned, that he could do whatever he wanted with it. Not accurate. I assumed that all the records that they had of his battle for over 2 years with glioblastoma, that they could be made available. Not so clear. The cost of getting those records was, and by the way, he was at a great, wonderful hospital with incredible doctors. I don't want to turn this into a screed about, but it's just practical things that are really, really difficult to work your way through. For example, we all heard, and Democrats and Republicans have talked about how much money we could save in the healthcare system, and how much we could increase the efficacy of certain medicines, as well as recommendations by docs as how to treat all kinds of diseases, if we had electronic record keeping.
Right.
Well, you know, I know a lot of folks don't like the fact that the Recovery Act was over $800 billion, but to be blunt with it, the president and I sat down and said, while we're doing this, we might as well try to make government function better. And so we did things that bothered people that Amy loved and others didn't, like, focus $100 billion in education, $48 billion on interstate, infrastructure, more than the interstate highway system, et cetera. One of the things we did, we put in $35 billion for electronic record keeping. Well, what happened is 5 great outfits came along and they all bid for it. They all got a piece of it, and they all made sure they couldn't talk to each other.
It's amazing.
So
incompatible.
I'll give you a practical example. A lot of you know this. You know, there's a great advantage to all of you in this room. We probably have greater access to the best people than other people may have. As Vice President of the United States, my son was a decorated war veteran. He was, so he was at, we got him to MD, anybody could get to, but we got him to MD Anderson, and toward the end, he turned out to be part of a trial of one with two experimental programs that were last ditch, they were immunotherapies designed to get the T cells to focusing on the cancer, break the blood-brain barrier, get to the cancer, and essentially eat up the cancer, in layman's terms. But it required him to have MRIs regularly, meaning a couple times a day, to see what was happening, how it was going. And what we found out was when he was because he had been up here, he was at Walter Reed in Bethesda, and they were very good. They had a great team as to following what MD Anderson wanted them doing in terms of the particular MRIs and the focus, et cetera. And we found out there's no way to get the information
Astonishing.
down. So the medical doc assigned to me, a really great diagnostician, a good guy, Doc O'Connor, former Delta, he was going in, and my son-in-law, but he's a leading surgeon in the Delaware Valley, does at Jefferson Hospital, does cancer flaps, reconstructs people's bodies and faces with cancer. And because they both knew their way around, what they do, they go in and take a picture of the MRI on a cell phone and sending it down, or getting on a plane and flying down. Now, that is bizarre. I mean, it really is bizarre. We cannot, and there's no incentive for any one of these 5 outfits to say, hey, look, let's all get together. And so one of the things I'm finding is I've gone around the...
Can you push that?
Yes,
can you
we
make
can.
that happen?
Here's what I think we can do. There is a growing consensus among the best people in the country across the board in all of the disciplines that relate to the fight against cancer, that we should have a common language. Like, for example, when the human genome was sequenced, we found out that You know, you're talking about a couple billion pieces of information and thousands of genes, and it was so big that we concluded no one outfit could do it. So what we did is we went around the world, literally, and we handed out, we said, okay, you take, I'm being figurative, you take A to C, and you take C to P, you know, and we broke it up. But the condition was that each of these organizations, and some were in other countries, had to immediately share all of the data that they got with one another. It was insisted by the NIH that it had to be done that way. So we cracked the human genome. We actually were able to do that in sharing that information instantaneously. And now in the human genome, there is a common language. You must use the precise language that is needed, the precise terminology, in order to do anything in terms of dealing with the genome. There is no such precise language as it relates to medical records. So to oversimplify it, one doc will write down, a broken leg. Other guy will write down a broken femur. Another guy will write down a fractured tip. And there's no way the computer can go out and aggregate all that data. So one of the things I proposed when I started this 5 months ago is, why don't we insist on a common language and electronic record keeping? Well, that made a lot of people very angry. But at the last Moonshot, where we had over 9,000 people participating, you had leading members of industry and medicine saying, we need a common language. And that's one of the things I talked to one of the brightest guys I've ever met is Lander.
Yeah, Eric Lander,
Eric Lander at MIT.
You
know, so we're talking about how we can get a consensus among these various large entities that we have a common language and electronic record keeping.
You mentioned a couple times what you learned from your son, Beau's treatment. What about emotionally? Walk us through that.
I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'll bet 20% of you have had someone close to you die or go through a pretty damn tough period of time. And one of the things that we all have in common in this tent is that when someone you love, when someone you adore, when someone's your soul, and they have a problem, particularly if they're your child or your spouse, but just anybody, particularly if it's your child, what you try to do is you try to learn as much as you possibly can about whatever that crisis is facing that child at that moment. And so that's what Jill and I did. And one of the things for us, at least, and for my Ashley, my daughter, sitting here, who is the love of his life, was that we knew the August before at Anderson that he received a death sentence. Stage 4 glioblastoma of the brain. Virtually no one makes it. But like all of you who've been through this, hope matters. My mother used to say, as long as you're alive, you have an obligation to strive, and you're not dead till you've seen the face of God. And you have to have hope. And for Jill and me and my whole family, Beau made it, I don't know how to say easier. Beau made it possible for us to get up every morning and put one foot in front of the other. Like when Beau, 6 months before he left, he sat me down. Jill and I were having dinner at his home, and on a Friday, we come home every weekend, and he asked his wife, Hallie, a wonderful woman, if she could put the kids upstairs and come back down. And he sat down with me and he said, Dad, I know no one loves me more than you do. But Dad, look at me. Look at me. I said, honey, I'm looking at you. And he said, Dad, I'm going to be okay. Excuse me. I'm going to be okay no matter what happens. But you got to promise me, Dad. Promise me. Promise me you're going to be okay. You've got to be okay, Dad. Look at me, Dad. You've got to be okay. And so Bo, for us, was, you know, he, every time we'd get sort of down, it was the kid who was, he just gathered the family up and he'd say, now, come on. Damn it, come on. And so it was maybe a different experience than some people had. But as my son Hunter said, he said, Dad, I don't know whether to thank you or hate you for teaching us how to love each other so much. Because, you know, well, you all know, you know. I'm not. But the one thing Bo did was, you know, I know since I'm not running, don't have any intention of running, I can say it now. Bo made us all promise, not a joke, promise that we'd stay engaged, man, that we'd push this. You know, my dad used to have an expression. He'd say, Joey never complained and never explained. Not one time from the moment he was born, you will not find a living person will tell you Bo Biden ever once complained about a thing. And so he looked at us and was like, you know, you got to stay in the game. You got to get up. And she'd say, you got to put one foot in front of the other. Just move, move. So we've decided to, I'll conclude with this. We decided to look at what happened to our Bo and focus on what he'd want us to be doing, what he'd want us to be working on, what he'd, what would make him proud of us, of the things that he cared so deeply about. And I hope I'm saying it the right way, babe.
And among those things, I know he talked about was things your mom and dad talked about a lot, which are just making sure everybody got the decent shot. I remember 8 or 9 years ago, right before the financial crisis, you were saying working people in this country weren't getting a decent shot. That's why you were doing this. That's what you're fighting for.
Well, look. No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, we now see this eruption around the world of people very frustrated, and the things your son fought for and your dad and mom stood for are being undermined, and it's something you've spoken out a lot about. How does that explain the frustration we're all feeling today?
The honest answer is, I'm not sure, but it's an old joke. I don't know much about art, but I know what I like. I think it's a couple things. Number one, I think those people outside are getting wet, so they ought to come in. You ought to let them in the house here.
Use this one, too.
Yeah, I think you ought to all come in.
Is there a way we can bring people in,
A
as
little
the
bit.
Vice President said? Put them in the aisle if it's allowed, yeah.
But I think a couple things. There used to be a basic bargain, in my view. A basic bargain in the country that existed at least from the late 30s on. Democrats and Republicans shared the view. And that is that if you contributed to the profitability of the enterprise you were part of. You got to share in the benefits that flowed from that. And no, I mean, it was Republicans felt strongly about that. That was sort of the basic bargain. And as a practical matter, that bargain hasn't been sustained now. You can argue about the details, and there are those who criticize, but there was a study done at the University of Massachusetts, published in Harvard Business Journal, where 447 of the, I come from the corporate state of Delaware. I got elected 7 times. I am not I love Bernie, I ain't Bernie. But what happened was that those 447 who had been in the Fortune 500 for that entire time, they made $2.7 trillion in profit. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. But what happened was they spent 53% of that profit buying back their own stock, and they spent 37% on dividends and 9% for everything else, research, development, expansion, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons for that, globalization, a whole bunch of other things, but the bottom line was, if I have a cartoon in my office that my staff keeps trying to put away. It's, I think you've seen it, David. It's a picture of out of the New Yorker, a picture of a guy, a rotund guy in a black turtleneck sweater, black mask, a beret, big bag of money on the table, being interrogated. And he says, how was I supposed to know he was a job creator? Well, you know, my dad sold automobiles. He was a job creator for General Motors. You know, the folks, you know, used to be the highest paid people in corporate America beyond the top executives were the sales personnel. They created jobs. They sold the product, et cetera. That's not the case now. And it's not any cabal. It's not any great conspiracy. It's a consequence of 1,000 little changes that have taken place that I think you're finding an awful lot of people, not only here but around the world, are beginning to rethink. I met with 5 of the probably the 25 CEOs of the 25 largest companies, and a guy who runs the largest management fund, over $7 trillion. They want to meet with me privately about corporate responsibility and reestablishing what constitutes corporate responsibility. And what happens is people don't think they're a part of the deal anymore. And the nature of the financial crisis, in my view, which was not any one person's making, but what happened was you got a guy who never ever, a woman never ever missed a mortgage payment, living in a neighborhood where 3 guys got those cockamamie mortgage. Their lawns turned brown. What happened was they were foreclosed on. All of a sudden, they lost their home because they were underwater. You found people walking in as a consequence of the crisis who just gotten a corporate, they got their yearly review, they got great marks and say, give me your computer card, you're done. So people felt like they were helpless, I think, in terms of what happened to them. And I don't think any of us have spoken as clearly to their fears and their aspirations as necessary, to let them know that it really matters. I know in Washington, a lot of you guys refer to me as middle-class Joe, okay? That's the handle. And in Washington, that means, as you all know, you're all sophisticated. If you're middle class, you can't be that sophisticated. That's what they're talking about with me. But I tell you one thing, the reason I talk about the middle class so much, it's not about fairness alone, it's about stability. As long as the middle class is growing, we have a social and political stability in this country. And it's been sustained over the last 100 years because the middle class has been more stable than any other place in the world. It is the element of our ability to continue to have this aspirational notion that anything is possible in the country. And if you notice, they're losing that sense of possibility now. And there's no easy answer to it. But failing to speak to it, failing to acknowledge it, failing to indicate, I always say to my staff, if you write me a speech, make sure that the first thing that I communicate is I understand what you're worried about. I understand your problem. And I don't think any of us have spoken very well to that concern. And so, but you're seeing it around the world. Anyway.
You're seeing it, that's all right. You're seeing it around the world, but especially in this country, especially the Trump voters, rejecting immigration, rejecting trade, rejecting some technological progress. Do we have to rethink our trade agreements? Do we have to rethink immigration? Or do we have to explain better what we stand for?
I think a little of both. That's not a problem. I was just in Ireland, and it's the 100th anniversary of the Easter Rising, 1916. And there's a line in Yeats's poem. You know, I know Senator Warner and others know I'd always quote Irish poets on the floor of the Senate. They all think I did it because I'm Irish. That's not the reason. I did it because they're the best poets. There's a line in his poem that he was describing his Ireland in 1916 that I think better describes the world today that we find ourselves in than it did his Ireland in 1916. It says, all's changed utterly. A terrible beauty has been born. All's changed utterly. A terrible beauty has been born. All has changed in the last 15 years in fundamental ways. And it always takes governments in every moment of inflection, probably 5 in our history. It always requires government to taking time to catch up with the change that has occurred. And so people are having great difficulty understanding, and we're having great difficulty absorbing some of the changes that have taken place. We no longer are directly concerned, immediately concerned about 2 major wars on 2 fronts. We're talking about stateless actors around the world who are wreaking havoc on us. And in consequence of that, they're also generating a kind of fear and apprehension that if we play to that fear, it can eat us alive. We are not, there's no existential threat to the United States from Al-Qaeda. There's reason to worry, but there's no existential threat. Yet, if it's easy to play on it. I can play on that fear that if, in fact, at any restaurant you go to in an upscale place like Aspen, what could happen to you, what just happened in Bangladesh in an upscale bakery. The likelihood of that happening are like us being struck by lightning and all killed here. Possible, not likely. Not likely. But it seems to me it matters. It matters how political leaders speak to these things. It matters how we talk about it. And the truth is, some trade agreements have hurt certain industries, have hurt workers in certain places, but there has always been that transitional requirement when every new revolution comes along. We're kind of in the 4th industrial revolution right now. And government has to figure out how to manage those changes to provide for and respond to the possibilities that everybody is going to have a chance to be treated with dignity and being able to make a living. And right now, people are worried about that because we are, even the best thinkers in the country are not exactly sure exactly which way to go. And so, for example, TPP. TPP, from my perspective, is a more important foreign policy document than it is an economic tool. If we abandon the region of Asia, where 45% of the world's GDP is, just the sheer weight, size, and influence of China will have a gigantic impact on the nations with no other place to turn. But have we negotiated the toughest? Have we negotiated the most reasonable agreement? People can argue about that. But the idea that we can move away from enhancing trade and tying nations closer together is a denial of historical trends. And so I'm not sure that answers your question, but I think we have to explain it better, but acknowledge. Look, one of the things, in my view, we have to do is when intelligent, hardworking Americans express a fear, an anxiety that has legitimacy to it, we have an obligation to respond to it. Not act like we know better. Not act like that we have, there's a clear, unequivocal answer. We've got to engage them. And I don't think we do it enough. I don't think we, because we are, and I think part of the reason is, and I don't know whether my Republican friends will agree, but our politics is more divided than our people are right now. The difference between when Newt was Speaker and I was in the Senate is that as strongly as we disagreed, we actually talked with one another. We actually trusted each other. We trusted each other when you gave your hand that would be a deal. We used to actually get to know one another. Sadly, I went into, Amy, I didn't realize you guys don't have a private Senate dining room anymore. The dining room that used to be, there was a Senate dining room and then a private one with two great big conference tables. When I first got to the Senate, I didn't want to be there, and Ted Kennedy dragged me over and said, you want to learn about the Senate? Make sure you sit here for an hour and a half every day. All the senior members came in, Democrat and Republican. They talked to us. The only place we did business. And everybody, you'd hear the old stories. You'd talk about strategy. You got to know one another. You travel with one another. When you learn that your colleague has a wife with breast cancer, or a colleague has a son who's suffering from a drug problem, or that their mother has Alzheimer's, or they're dealing with a serious problem, it's awful hard to dislike them. It's awful hard to ascribe motive, negative motive to everything they do. And you actually, it takes the edge off of real differences. When I got to the Senate, there were more substantive differences than exist today. The war in Vietnam was raging. The women's movement and civil rights were just, I mean, it was combustible. There were so many things, but yet you actually spoke to one another. I'll end by saying the best lesson I ever learned, I got to the Senate when I was 20, I was elected when I was 29. And right afterwards, there was an accident where a tractor trailer broadsided my wife and daughter's car and my two kids and killed my wife and daughter, and my two boys were badly injured. And so I didn't want to go to the Senate. And a lot of the senior guys came to see me, including guys like Saxby and Stevens of Alaska, not just Democrats. And you remember this. And they said, come on down, just stay 6 months. We need you to organize. I was the first United States senator I ever knew. I didn't know they didn't need me. There was a Democratic governor. There were 58 Democratic senators. They didn't need me at all. But it basically saved my sanity. And I know I went down, and what I have to do is every single Tuesday at 3 o'clock, I went to Senator Mansfield's office. He was the leader of the Senate from Montana, Iron Mike Mansfield. I don't think any of my colleagues there would say a single person ever doubted his integrity or his character. And he'd give me an assignment. And I thought all freshmen got assignments. No, I'm serious. I thought they did. And he'd give me an assignment. But what he was really doing, I learned about 5 months in, I figured out, was just sort of taking my pulse. How am I doing? How are you doing? And one day I walked in the Senate floor for my 3 o'clock meeting, and I got off the elevators, walked through those double doors, down to the well of the Senate, where I'd always check when the last vote was so I could take the train home to see my boys. And Jesse Helms, who I ended up working with a long, long time, was on the floor excoriating Ted Kennedy and a guy who I consider a very close personal friend, Bob Dole, who I still keep in close contact with. for the precursor to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it basically was, why the hell should the public have to pay for curb cuts? I'm exaggerating to make a point. But it was all about those with handicaps. And anyway, so I walked in. Fortunately, I couldn't stop because I was more afraid of missing Mansfield. I probably would have said something, not that I've ever said anything in politics, but I probably would have said something very stupid. And I walked in, I sat across from Mansfield's desk, and I'd always sit across from the desk. And he always had a remember that corncob pipe he had? Hardly ever lighted, but he had it in his hand all the time. And he looked at me and he said, no clip tones, he said, "What's the matter, Joe?" And I went on, what probably was 3 minutes, it probably sounded like an hour. I went on after Jesse Helms. I said, he has no social redeeming value. This guy is, I really went after his on a motive. And he waited till I finished. He looked at me, he said, "Joe," it's an absolute true story, my word is abiding. He said, "What would you say, Joe, if I told you in 1970, sitting in the living room in Raleigh, Dot Helms and Jesse Helms are reading an advertisement in the Raleigh Observer, and there's a picture of a young boy, I think he was 14, Joe, with metal braces up to his hips on both legs and steel crutches, saying, 'All I want for Christmas is someone to love me and take me home.'" He said, "What would you say, Joe, if I told you Jesse and Dot Helms adopted that young man?" I said, "I'd feel terrible." He said, "Well, Joe, they did." And he said, "Joe, something I learned a long time ago. It's never inappropriate to challenge the judgment of another man or woman. But it's never appropriate to question their motive because you don't know. You may think you know. And when you challenge their motive, you make it almost impossible to get to go. You make it almost impossible to reach an agreement. Today, and by the way, when Jesse died, Chris Dodd and I were the only two Democrats who went to the funeral. I think you were there. They walked out, it was a big Baptist church. They walked out in a receiving room, Dot and his beautiful daughters, bright kids, and this now 55-year-old man on crutches. And they all walked not to me or not the Republican, they all walked up to me. And they said, "Joe, we had your signs on our lawn this election. Obama, Biden for president." My point is, before Jesse died, he asked me to do the foreword for his book. The point is that you know, we don't listen to each other much anymore. And nobody disagreed more on civil rights and civil liberties than Jesse and Joe Biden. Now I'm making him a relative, but you know, it's too much invective now, and it's awful hard. You know, it's awful hard to generate a consensus on just about anything, and it worries me. And it worries me, and I'll conclude by saying that's what worries me about this election. What worries me about this election is it looks like an election that's going to be conducted that is frontal assault on the other person. And I'm not sure, even when there is the substantive arguments being made, how much will be listened to by the press. And we got to get by this place. We really do, for the sake of the country. We got to get by it. And anyway.
Yep. Gets back to your wonderful poets, where the falcon can't hear the falconer, the center will not hold. Is there anything we can do to bring back a way for the center to hold?
I think so. First of all, I look out at Senator Warner and other members here.
Amy.
And Amy, I already mentioned Amy, is that I think the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans in the Senate and the House know better. And this is a case where it's sort of the tail wagging the dog a little bit here. But because of the way we Democrats as well, the way we've gerrymandered House districts where you don't have to worry about anything except a challenge from your right if you're Republican, your left if you're a Democrat. Because of the ability to put, and I don't want to sound like a purist here, but the ability to put enormous amounts of money on a single candidate, $4 or $5, $10 million. If they move from the orthodoxy of the far left or the far right in the parties, it makes it awful hard. I really think that my friends in the Senate have made a tragic mistake that is going to last for a while on refusal to hold a hearing on the Supreme Court justice. Now, by the way, it's not because it'll just be repeated, And so I called 17 of my Republican friends, and I say that, they're genuinely my friends in the Senate. And all but 3 said, Joe, I know you're right. I know you're right. But Joe, if I break, it's going to cause me this problem or that problem, whatever. Joe, if it breaks, we'll break with you. We'll be there. But don't ask me to be the first person to do this. And I understand that. But what I don't understand is why a couple haven't broken. Because, look, I don't understand why you'd want a job where you have to get up, if it's true, and take a position different than you believe 20, 30, 40% of the time, and still want that job.
Wow.
It's not about being honorable, or it's just, why the hell would you want that job? No, I'm serious. I'm deadly earnest, because I can tell you, as when the Washington Post, when I did my financial disclosure, as vice president, they said, quote, it's probable no man has ever assumed the office of vice president with fewer assets than Joe Biden. I assume they meant financial. I may not, but you can do a lot better. You can do a lot better out there than in here financially. And so I don't quite get it right now.
Sam says can have more time, so I'm going to actually let a couple people raise their hands, and I'll call on them if you want. Yes, the person hardest.
I will not be offended if you get up and leave.
The person hardest for the microphone to get. I always do that. Identify yourself, please.
I'm Rachel Richards with Pickens County here, and welcome to our community. We're really glad to have you here in the Institute, who does so many fabulous things for us. I wanted to go briefly back to the cancer issue to ask, it's my understanding that in the European Union, where there is single-payer health care, the health system gets more concerned with the causes of cancer and the potential contaminants within our society and chemicals and so on. But here we're kind of more siloed, where you go to the medical community when you're sick, but they're not really looking for the various environmental causes. How do we break that wall and that silo down between causation and treatment? Well,
I think we are, by the way. There's an awful lot going on now. For example, they're at MD Anderson, over in Baltimore, I'm trying to think of the other major, I think it's the Hutch. I know Hopkins, but I'm thinking the Hutch out in Washington State. They are
Mount
working.
Sinai. We're going to give Kim Davis a shout out too for doing that. Yeah.
Y'all are working on being able to conduct tests that are blood tests, in effect, to determine whether or not you have a cancer marker in your bloodstream that can give advance notice by a long shot. as to whether or not you're likely to develop cancer. I was out at the Aspen Institute. They've come up with a way, with others have as well, determine hereditary causes of colon cancer. And now what they have is they're notifying people so that they can have, instead of the colonoscopy once every 2 years, this cadre of people will be able to live a hell of a lot longer because they'll be able to go in and have colonoscopies, and there's changes in colonoscopies, by the way, every 6 months or so. They're going to live longer. So we're doing both here. We're not just focusing on one side or the other. But if you want to, if you could wave a wand, you only got to do one thing, deal with one of the problems of cancer. If you said, if I could deal with prevention and get a response, you'd eliminate 50% of the cancers that occur in the United States of America. 50% of the cancers. Dealing with the air, the water, what you eat, what you smoke, what your dietary habits are. They're gigantic, gigantic, gigantic impact on cancer. One of the things we're doing in this moonshot is we are trying to bring together a whole group of folks to cooperate. Like I just went out to Cleveland, the Cleveland Clinic in Case Western, along with GW Health Facility, because the incidence of smoking are higher in both of those communities, DC and Cleveland, than there are other places. And if you're able to get folks exposed to lung cancer, get tested whether they have lung cancer, you can save a whole lot of lives. There's setting up mobile van. There's a lot of things we can do. But we also can't walk away. If you just did this based on numbers, there's a lot of basically orphan cancers out there that kill 125, 250,000 people out of the 600,000 who are dying every year. The million, there's a total of cancers. I think it's 14 million people will get cancer this year, and 1 point some die of cancer. I mean, so what we're trying to do, and there's no reason why we think we can't, is try to do all of it, because we have enough disciplines to deal with it all without taking away from or impacting upon any one of the initiatives, whether it's prevention, better diagnostics, whether it's better treatment. We can do it all. We can do it all. And by the way, money is not our biggest problem. Reorganizing the way in which we attack cancer is a gigantic, gigantic, gigantic change that has to take place in order for us to have this sense of urgency. I know I'm always viewed as, I don't know, I'm often viewed as being a little too passionate and a little too, anyway. But you know, there are thousands and thousands of people, as I speak today, who are turning to their doc and say, Doc, can you give me just 1 more month so I can see my daughter get married? Doc, can I get by? Can I get by for another 8 months and see my granddaughter graduate? Doc, can I get this? Just give me, can I get another 2 months? Because if deals come through, I'll be able to pay off my home and my wife will not be left in debt. Doc. And there's so many things that we can do right now that can extend life a little bit. Also, reach real cures. And there's no reason why we have to do it. We have to choose among the various disciplines we're going to focus on, in my view.
Thank you. There was one way in the back who's been waving his hand, and you get the last question. So, because we need an ankle biter to send us off.
How do you think the next president and vice president can achieve and improve on your cancer treatments?
Well, I tell you what, I'll answer the question if you make me one promise. When you're president and I come by with my great-grandchildren, and they say, Joe Biden's out there, you won't say Joe who, okay? What a bright young guy. How old are you?
10. I'm 10.
How old?
I'm 10.
Oh, you're getting old, man. Double figures. Well, I think we can do two things. One of the things that I was excited about in the Cancer Moonshot, and that, Greg, 260 off-site cancer, 270, with over 7,000 people, serious docs and patient groups, et cetera, all over America, from Guam to Puerto Rico. And thousands of people assembled for the first time ever at the request of the government. And all the stakeholders are there. I hope we've done one thing. We have re-energized the notion that an awful lot is possible, making sure that everybody understands that there's so much we can do. And I hope we've come forward with 38 changes we've offered, about 20 of them on the federal government side of the ledger. For example, if we make these changes, the next president's going to be in a much better position to make some of the moves that have to be made. For example, if you go into an old diner or you go into a bar and you put money in a jukebox, you don't have to work out whether you're going to have a song played or whether you have a licensing agreement with that artist to be able to have the song played. Well, right now, you have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drugs in trial right now, developed by various companies and individuals in research. And so what happens is you have a lot of bright, young and not so young researchers saying, if we took a combination of these three drugs and combined them together, we would be able to impact exponentially on that particular cancer that's being treated. But to get that done now, what happens is you have to you can get agreement as to what you want to get this done. NIH will sign off on you being able to do that. But then you got to go work out an agreement with each of the companies relating to intellectual property and a whole range of other things. Well, we put a new thing in place that is going to, I think, have a real impact. NIH is negotiating with, and so far we have 9 or 10 biopharmaceutical firms signed up, an awful lot of the biggest philanthropies, an awful lot of the hospitals, where there's now hundreds of drugs in trial. And all you have to do, they've already worked out the mechanism that how they would share and protect their investment in each of the drugs that they produced. So you don't have to work out a licensing agreement with them. And this will go from taking a year to a year and a half to be able to get permission to move with dual therapies, to be able to do it in 3 months. And that's going to affect a lot of people's lives somewhere. I can't predict where or how or who, but it's going to increase the sense of urgency of moving forward. There's a whole range of things we can do where we can move much more rapidly. At the federal level, we can move much more rapidly, where we can get CMS more engaged in carrying the cost of some things, where we can get NIH more responsive directly so that they're taking chances earlier on with younger folks who are in. Right now, you want to get a grant, you have to be in a lab of somebody very established and be there for a long time in order to qualify, et cetera. So there's ways we can speed up without in any way negatively impacting on safety or security or proprietary rights that can just move this whole train down the track faster. And I think even people who don't like how hard I'm pushing on some of these things, you ask them, I think they'll tell you privately, yeah, we can move a whole lot faster. We can move a whole lot faster. Some don't like moving faster because it's not going to be them that did it. It's not going to be that individual who did it. Because there's not, shared science is not, if you're an astrophysicist and you want a grant from DARPA or from the space agency, and you get that grant and you decide on, you find some breakthrough on whether it's Saturn rings or water on Mars, whatever, you got to make that information immediately available on the web to everybody who wants it so they can all benefit from it. You do that in, what was the one was done, the cancer breakthrough, and it was instead of Science magazine doing it, when the genome was finally cracked, the decision was where to publish all this information. And Science magazine, which is more prestigious, didn't want it unless they had a proprietary interest in who could have access to it. So it was published in Nature magazine. I'm serious. Yeah. Now, as my brother would say, go figure. Imagine keeping that information under wraps for another year or year and a half because some proprietary interest. In the field of cancer, that year makes a difference between someone living and dying. Whether they live another 3 months or 6 days or whatever. And so all we're trying to do is within the range of reason, speed up the process in a way that in no way compromises public health, safety, or security, does not go in and attempt to deny the benefits that should flow from the research and the development done by an individual or a company, but has some rational basis to it. You're awful kind. Thank you all so very much. Thanks.
I want to say one thing personally. In all of my years, Vice President Biden is the person I most like and most respect in national public life. It's true. You're a great man. Thank you.
That's really generous.
God bless you. God bless Kitty Boone. And God bless America on its 240th birthday. Thank you, sir.